hope you had a good week. It's weekend again, so let's review another very interesting research paper. Well, today we're actually going to look at two papers so that we can try to answer the question, what does power do to people? Does power always corrupt? Well, let's see. Do you remember this scene from Men in Black? The character of Will Smith was participating in this selection interview type thing. And these applicants were recruits, were asked to fill out a form with a very sharp pencil, which is a hard thing to do, since they didn't have a desk. There is this coffee table in the middle of the room, which is very far away from everybody. Only Will Smith dared to move it or thought of moving it. So he dragged the coffee table all the way to his seat and offered to share it with his neighbor. Of course, the senior agents who observed all this indicated that this obviously meant something, which is why they eventually selected Will Smith to be the new agent. Well, this first experiment that we're going to look at today has some similarity or resemblance to this movie scene. This study looked at how power might influence a person's actions and behaviors. In this 2003 experiment, the researchers set out to investigate whether or not people primed with a high sense of power would be more likely to take actions in a manner that is congruent with their own wishes. So the researchers needed to create an experiment in which all people should want to act in a certain way, and yet the situation would make it ambiguous as to whether they are allowed to act in that manner. Just like in the movie, everyone should want to use that coffee table, and yet for some reason only one person actually moved it in order to use it. So this is how the experiment went. First, subjects were primed with either high power or low power. This was done by asking them to write an essay, describing an experience or a personal situation in which they held power over somebody else or someone else held power over them. So the idea is, when you write about how you had power over somebody else, how you could control their behaviors, how they depended on you for something that they wanted, this would make you feel powerful. This would prime you or give you a high sense of power. And with this high sense of power, you go into the experiment. On the other hand, if you had to write about how somebody else had power over you, how they controlled your behavior and things you wanted, this would trigger a sense of powerlessness, a sense of lack of power. After this essay writing task, the participants were led into individual rooms and each person was given another task, a resource allocation task. This is not a distractor task. This is still part of the manipulation because this resource allocation task is set up in such a way that it further reinforces the power prime. High-power participants were asked to allocate resources for others, reflecting their powerfulness, whereas for the low-power participants, they were asked to guess how others might allocate resources for them, reflecting their powerlessness. And now, here is the dependent variable. When the participants were completing the resource allocation task on paper sitting at a desk in this individual room, there is a fan blowing at them, causing discomfort. The researchers were interested in seeing who would take actions against that fan, maybe moving it or pointing it somewhere else or turning it off or unplugging the thing. So that is the dependent variable. That is what the researchers wanted to find out. And now the result. Well, it is probably not very surprising that there was a difference between the high power and the low power conditions in terms of the likelihood for the participants to take actions against the fan. For the high power condition, participants were more than twice as likely to take action against the fan than to ignore it. For the low power condition, fewer than half of the participants acted on the fan. These findings of this experiment could be, and indeed have been, interpreted to mean different things. An apparent and logical interpretation is that powerful individuals are more likely to act in a manner that is consistent with their inner dispositions and inclinations. Another interpretation of these findings that I read from a different paper which cited this study is that the powerful are more likely to take action to correct situational errors and imperfections, even when it is ambiguous whether or not one is supposed to do so. Many would argue that this is a good thing. Look, if you give somebody power, that is good, because this would lead to pro-social outcomes. This person will dare to take action to correct problems and errors that the less powerful might not dare to correct. So power can be really good. Power can make people brave and give them the courage to correct errors and solve problems in organizations and society. So this is the first experiment we're going to talk about in this video. Now let's take a look at another one. In this second experiment, which was published in 2012, it shows kind of the opposite, that those who are more powerful may not necessarily act in a way that is more pro-social. This second experiment has some similarities with the first one that we just talked about. The researchers also manipulated participants' sense of power in order to see whether or not that might influence their behaviors. But they did something more. The first thing that the participants had to do in this study was to complete a self-report survey. This survey was administered 1 week prior to the actual experiment, and this survey measured, among other things, the following 2 key variables: trait power and moral identity. The self-report measure of trait power basically refers to how powerful and dominant a person thinks he or she is, given his or her individual dispositional personality characteristics. So simply put, how powerful do you think you are, given all your personality characters and other key individual dispositions? Moral identity refers to, simply put, how important morality is for this person, how crucial morality is as part of this person's overall personal identity. So trait power and moral identity, these are the 2 key variables measured in this first phase survey. 1 week after this survey was administered, the experiment took place. The first thing that the researchers did on the day of the experiment was to manipulate the sense of power that the respondents experienced. The researchers used the same technique utilized by the previous study that we just talked about. They triggered a high sense of power by asking half of the respondents to write about personal experience or situation in which they held power over somebody else, where they could control and influence the behaviors of somebody else, where someone else depended on them for something that was important and valuable. So this was how the researchers triggered a high sense of power in half of the respondents. For the other half of the respondents, the researchers didn't trigger a high or a low sense of power. This other half simply functioned as the control. So this is the difference between this study and the previous study that we just talked about. In that previous study, we had a high power condition versus a low power condition, whereas in this study, we have a high power condition versus a control condition, which is power neutral. So after this power manipulation, participants were asked to play a dictator game. Simply put, this game was set up to see how the respondent would distribute resources between themselves versus somebody else. And the game was set up in such a way that the more you benefit yourself, the more others would lose. It's a zero-sum game. Through this dictator game, the researchers could measure how selfish or self-serving the respondents' behavior was. This self-serving behavior was also measured through a self-report survey. Here, the respondents had to answer a bunch of questions on a scale of 1 to 5 concerning how often they would benefit themselves despite exacting a cost to the organization they worked for. So self-serving behavior was measured by 2 things in this experiment: the dictator game and this self-report survey measuring self-serving organizational deviance behavior. Alright, so that was the experimental design, and now let's take a look at the results. Once again, let's remember that the key thing we're interested in, the key thing that the researchers were interested in, is whether or not power would influence people's engagement in self-serving behaviors. And let's also remember that this study was designed very cleverly because both power and self-serving behavior were measured by 2 different kinds of measures. Power was measured by trait power as well as the power manipulation. Self-serving behavior was also measured by 2 things: the dictator game as well as the self-report of self-serving organizational deviance behavior. In analyzing the data, we see that the researchers used power manipulation to predict the dictator game behavior, and they used trait power to predict self-interested deviance behavior at work, which is very logical. And here is what they found. Looking at their regression analysis on the dictator game, controlling for gender and social desirability, the 2 control variables, they found that power had no significant influence on self-serving behavior as measured by the dictator game. Now for self-serving behavior at work, there is a similar pattern of findings. Having controlled for the 2 control variables, power had no significant impact on self-report of organizational deviance behavior. Essentially, these statistical results indicate that power had no bearing on self-serving behaviors. These findings already stand out somewhat in contrast to what the previous study that we discussed earlier showed. Because that previous study clearly showed that power had an influence on participants' behaviors, whereas this study showed no significant influence at all. The reason for that, as these researchers have hypothesized and shown, is that power does not impact all people in the same way. Let's look at the regression analysis a little bit further. We see that the interaction between power and moral identity significantly predicted self-serving behaviors in both cases, so both in the dictator game and in the case of the self-report of organizational deviance behavior. The interaction term is a significant predictor, which is important. The authors actually plotted the interaction effects in line charts, which show that for people with high moral identity, power was negatively related to self-serving behavior, whereas for those with a low moral identity, power was positively related to self-serving behavior. So to paraphrase a little bit, give power to selfish people who have a low moral identity, well, they're going to act even more selfishly. Give power to selfless, moral people, they're going to act in a way that is even more pro-social and selfless. So in this respect, the finding of this experiment is actually quite consistent with the findings of the previous study, that power triggers people to act in a manner that is coherent and congruent with their inner dispositions and inclinations. And this is why power literature tend to say power does not necessarily always corrupt. Power reveals. If you want to know what a person is really like, well, give that person power. Then chances are they're going to show their true self. It's like that movie with Jim Carrey, The Mask. Put that magical mask on, whatever is deep within you will come out. That mask is like power. Look, in real life, I have had colleagues who were promoted and given a lot more power in the organization, and yet they remained hardworking, respectful, supportive, and caring. In fact, they became even more so because they wanted to be a good role model. But I've also had, and probably you have also had, colleagues who were promoted and given more power in the company, and almost immediately, overnight, they became arrogant, rude, disrespectful, and selfish. Some might say, oh, power impacted these people very differently. But I guess the fact of the matter is, power simply made those people show their true colors. You know, this reminds me of a quote that I read somewhere on the internet. Power is like alcohol. It does not really change you. It simply reveals who you truly are.